everyone, here is how I made Audrey's second birthday dress. It's a bodice dress with long sleeves, and to create that I used a combination of the bodice dress pattern by Colors, etc., which I know is out of print. I'm very sorry, but I will link a similar cut below if I can find one. But any bodice dress pattern that you happen to have should work for this, and the long sleeves are from Children's Corner's Ruthie pattern, but again, any long sleeves will work here. So if you'd like to embellish the bodice, do that before cutting out your pattern piece. I did cut work for the very first time, so don't look so closely at it. And then after I was done with my embroidery, I cut out the bodice front. So all in all, you will have 2 bodice fronts cut on the fold as well as 2 bodice back pieces cut on the fold. And the Colors, etc. pattern puts darts on their back bodice, but at this age, I think it's fine either way, so don't stress if your pattern doesn't have darts. But if yours does have darts, I like to put little notches where those are located, like at the bottom. And then I've got 2 long sleeves cut with that CC Ruthie pattern, and again I put notches to mark the front, back, and middle of that sleeve. And finally, I've got this lace that I'm adding to the dress. Everything is linked below. Oh, and the skirt pieces are just rectangulars, whatever size you'd like, and I will explain my sizing later on. So to do those darts, I just put a pin at the top of the dart. Gently pull that pin through the pattern piece, which will leave a little bit of a hole, and then I fold the fabric right sides together, lining up those notches, making sure that the pin is in the middle, if that makes sense. And then I sew from where the notches are to where that pin was. Generally you can see like where that hole was left by the pin. Then I put together my bodice pieces. Now you basically will have a circle with the back pieces across from each other and then the front pieces across from each other. Join every one together at the shoulder seams. Then I ironed out those 4 shoulder seams and I put fronts together. The wrong sides will be touching each other, and I gave that an ironing, making sure those back pieces and all the sleeve, armhole areas, everything's lining up nicely. Now this is optional, but if you'd like to add a collar or some lace trim, etc. or whatever, then this would be the time to do that. And having those iron creases on those back bodice pieces really helps in this optional step. So I'm adding some of this dotted Swiss lace. It is so lovely, and it is linked below along with everything else, like I said. And I want to have a very gentle gather. So I'm cutting more, like slightly more than 1.5 times the finished length dimension, if that makes sense. Then I'm running 2 rows of gather threads. You should know the drill by now if you've seen my other videos. 2 rows of gather threads, 1 on each side of where those permanent stitches are going to go. Really helps to keep the gathers from going crooked on you when you sew over top of them. So I'm just gathering and adjusting to my liking, and it is important to make sure that the raw edges go off of the dress top like so. That way they will be enclosed into that seam. Sorry, Henry just burped. I'm nursing him. Anywho, then I just sew that lace onto the bodice dress. Then I flip the lining of that bodice so it's right sides together with the bodice front, and again sew around that neckline. And I like to sew the previous stitches facing up so I can go right on top of those suckers. Then I clip the curves, trim up those corners, and push out the corners with this little tool. And then I gave everything a really good ironing. And after I ironed it, I went back to understitch that seam. And if you're unfamiliar, a really quick explanation of understitching is that it helps prevent your lining from kind of peeking back up at you. So if you want to do this, flip the entire seam to the lining side and sew as closely to the previous seam as possible. You won't be able to sew all the way around the neckline, but just get as close as you can, and that is just fine. So I gave the bodice an ironing and moved on to the sleeves. I wanted to embellish the sleeves with some tucks. If you remember from my CC Ruthie video, the sleeves are designed to be used with an elastic at the wrist. I wanted something a little bit more elegant for this look, so I'm doing fabric tucks. And I'm kind of guessing Audrey's wrist size here. She was napping at the time, but I should just have that written down, whatever. I'm trying to remember my thought process here, but the whole sleeve width at the bottom is 11 inches. And I'm guessing her wrist is around 6 inches circumference, so I've got about 4 inches to take up, which gives me 1 inch, 1 extra inch to go into that seam allowance. So I decided to make 7 tucks each 1/4 inch wide, which means each tuck is taking up 1/2 inch in fabric. So basically that's 3.5 inches total, which is close enough to 4 inches in my book. This is not rocket science, people, and it does not have to be. I hope all of that makes sense and I didn't lose y'all. So to make each tuck, I line up my marks and sew along that line. Simple as that. Oh, and to mark all of these, I'm using that friction on heat activated pin. It is linked below. I love the sucker. Because it's a heat activated pin, I just erase it with an iron. It is so easy. And I iron all of those tucks so they are pointing towards the back. Then I took a strip of fabric torn on the grain, folded that in half lengthwise. This is about 2 inches wide, and after giving it an iron, I attached it to the sleeve cuff with Henry's help. I trimmed up that seam slightly so when the band folds over, it just reaches those machine stitches. And if you've seen my previous videos, you can say it with me. I like to save all my hand sewing until the end whenever possible. So for now, I'm just going to iron the band over and move right along. Sometimes I feel like a broken record when recording these voiceovers. But anywho, before attaching the sleeve, I based the lining to the dress at the armhole. It's just one less thing to think about when you're attaching the sleeve. Then I gathered the sleeve top, again 2 rows of gather threads, but this sleeve only barely needed to be gathered to line up with the dress, which was fine. I mean, I kind of lucked out since I was going for more of an elegant look anyways. So I gathered the sleeve to fit the armhole and then sewed the sleeve to the dress with the right sides together. Then I trimmed at that seam allowance to about 1/4 inch and then did a zigzag to enclose those raw edges, or yes, you could use a serger instead. And you know, Henry was still helping. He is such a gentleman. Then it was time to work on the skirt. Okay, for the dimensions of my skirt, I wanted a full skirt, and since the fabric is on the lightweight side of life, I did a full selvage to selvage edge piece for both the skirt front as well as the back of the skirt. Then the length was whatever fits your little one. I think I went with 12 inches long. Can't remember, but it's not that important since you just adjust to fit yours, like I said. Just FYI on that width, I went on the full side of live. So I gathered the top of the skirt and sewed that to the front of the dress. Be careful not to catch the front lining into that seam. It'll be folded under and ironed down so it can be hand sewn into those machine stitches to hide those raw edges. Again, I like to save all this for later whenever possible. Before repeating the same thing to the back of the dress, you'll first put a placket down the skirt center. I just folded the piece in half to find the center, ironed it over, and used that crease mark as a guide when cutting for my placket. And I have 2 methods for putting in a placket, and both are linked down below. I did decide to use the continuous placket method for this one, just FYI. So then I folded the right side of the placket over, did those gather stitches, and then attached the skirt back to the back of the bodice, again making sure to keep that lining of the back of the bodice out of the way. And we are almost done, folks. So making sure both of those lining edges are still folded under, I put one side of the dress together and joined it using a French seam. And I have a detailed video linked below on how to do a French seam. I go from one sleeve cuff all the way down to the bottom of that skirt. And this is optional, but if you want to add lace or trim or whatever to the bottom of your dress, now would be the time to do that. I added this matching dotted Swiss lace to hem the dress. I did 2 rows of straight stitches, like about 1/8 of an inch apart. I trimmed up that seam and ran a zigzag over top of it. And after pressing that seam towards the dress, I joined the other side of the dress using a French seam. And that way, those raw edges of the lace are enclosed by the French seam. You see what I did there? Isn't that lovely? So now it's a matter of doing that little bit of handwork, adding buttons or snaps or whatever floats your boat to close the back of the dress. And then this was my finished garment, which was Audrey's dress for her 2nd birthday. She is 2, y'all. Happy, happy birthday to my sweet girl. You are loved more than you will ever know, and I cherish being able to make all these garments for you. I hope this video was helpful. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments below, and I will do my best to answer them. And as always, I appreciate y'all for watching, and I hope to catch y'all next time.